Hello and welcome to Zero Hanger TV Mailbag. I'm your host, Trinidad.
Wait, have we started?
Yeah, we started.
I was making a silly face at the camera.
And joining me is Mitch Keating. Do you want to just run with this as the intro?
Yeah.
It's casual, new set. We got it. It's fine.
It's all right.
All right, Mitch, you have a lot to answer for. We opened up the mailbag on our socials. We finished our trade target series, so we're going to go through everything that came, not everything, but most things that came through on our Instagram and our Facebook. And then we've got a couple of comments from our trade target series. How did you think that went in general?
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah? You got a lot of feedback.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Like, it's not as easy as just like looking at 5 names and being like, oh yeah, they'd love all of them. That's cool. Like, there's a little bit of, you gotta be a little bit realistic. Can't just have like 5 all Australians, like as much as every club would love them. And even sometimes just like looking at a club's list needs and then looking at who's available and off contract, and you're like, oh God, like they're just going to have to go to the draft again if they want to add to that position or get someone that their fans aren't really going to want to like. And that happens a lot. And hopefully sometimes they turn into good players. Sometimes they don't. Like you just have to look at Collingwood's 2022 off season, like someone like Frampton. Bobby Hill was always a really good talent coming into the club and a great get for them. But even a guy like Oleg Markov, who was probably unlucky to get delisted, but at the same time, I don't think anyone was thinking he'd be holding a role in a premiership side. So there are going to be there are probably a few names like those guys throughout this year's series for a few clubs where fans were like, why the hell would we want him? Yeah. It's like, well, it's not always just, getting top line talent. Sometimes you need depth players who have got 70 to 100 games under their belt who just might be better at a different club. Based
on the feedback, I assume you just pulled 5 names out of it.
Oh, that's exactly what I did.
All right. Well, let's get to the questions. The first one, we're going to go through our ones from Instagram. You can follow us on Instagram if you want to submit questions too. We might do another mailbag episode next week based around finals.
Yeah, and also if anyone missed, obviously, our posts, obviously on our community page on YouTube as well. We put out some feelers, so obviously if you missed a chance to write in, pending how successful today goes, well, we'll see. We'll see, we'll see.
All right, well, let's. We got 2 questions here that we've sort of meshed into one from Cody Johnson, 95. Any updates on Eagles players leaving and what trade deals gets the Barrass deal done? And then also from Andrew John Norman. How much is Tom Barrass worth to Hawks? Is pick 11, 28 and Granger Barrass realistic? So let's start with the first bit of that question. So updates on Eagles players leaving and what trade deal gets the Barrass deal done?
We'll leave Barrass to the end because there's a fair bit to break down in that one. But the Eagles are a kind of interesting one. We did our trade targets only last week. And one of those, which we only did for a couple clubs, was actually just looking at how they get draft capital in. And that is, parting with someone like a Tom Barrass. Maybe it's a Liam Ryan. Sounds like Jake Waterman will probably stay. So I think that's going to be a really important one for the Eagles, given I think he's a bit younger than Barrass, although, right in the peak of his powers at this point in time. So would have some great value just given the years he's had. But I think you'd only want to lose one of those guys. And it sounds like it's going to be Barrass anyway. So keep Waterman, big tick. Liam Ryan, their small forward stocks are okay. They're just young. Like Brockman, they obviously would have liked a bit more of out of this year, but he had some off-field issues to go on top of some form concerns. But guys like Dwyer look pretty good. Noah Long will come along. So, I think Ryan could be one, and there'd be some clubs contending that would love an extra small forward. I think Port would be one. Eston would love one. So there's a little bit there in Liam Ryan's case. Harry Edwards is another name that's been raised. You'd like to think that the Eagles would act pretty strongly to keep him, not only off his form, but if they lose Barrass, then they're left with Jeremy McGovern, who I'm convinced could lead a backline by himself. But he's a guy you really want to keep fit and not getting knocked around too much when he's in his mid-30s and holding down the fort. So Harry Edwards, I wouldn't be surprised if there's clubs really keen on him, given he's off contract and there aren't a lot of really good or promising key defenders out there. Tom Barrass is contracted, but from the off-contracted pool, Edwards, I would say, is one of the best available. He hasn't played much, but signs are certainly there. But like I said, they lose Barrass, they'll keep Edwards, you'd like to think. And that's probably it. Jack Darling, maybe. It'd be a really interesting one to see if he was to leave, just given who would be keen to go after him. Obviously, it would have to be a contending club. there might be a club like North Melbourne who maybe just wants some experience, and they get, almost 300 games with someone like him, second most goals at the club behind Josh Kennedy. So, he'd be an interesting one. But it sounds at this point maybe it's just Barrass that's realistic. But there could be a few names. It's very hard to not rule out anyone at this point that isn't named Harley Reid or Ruben Jimby or Elijah Hewitt. So, kind of an interesting case with the Eagles and who could leave. Circling to Barrass, it sounds like Hawthorn is just about done. A few WA media outlets on Monday were kind of reporting that a 5-year deal looks to be getting the final bits signed off. So as far as a trade package, it's quite interesting. I would think, and I guess kind of just blurting out multiple first round picks is probably where you'd like to sit. But the term first round pick now can go from anywhere between pick 1 and pick like 25 this year. But
Andrew John Norman here has put together a little Hawks package in pick 11 at 28 and Granger Barrass.
Yeah,
which is
it's interesting.
You'd take that, I think.
Yeah, well, pick 11 is probably going to be right in. It's going to be the main part of that deal. Hawthorn's future first would be very interesting to kind of have involved, just given how high they could go, and they still could go. Pick 11 could be blowing out to pick 15 by the end of this year, and then by the time draft night comes, it could go back even a few more spots. So the Eagles will be very mindful of what pick 11 is now and what it could be come draft night, and they might not be getting a top 15 pick really in the end for Tom Barrass, which would be, I think, pretty disappointing. 28 would kind of go back and then forward a little bit, I think, after bids and then matched bids and all the picks that kind of get taken in and swallowed up from match bids. So 28, it might stay at about 28, might go into the 30s. And then Granger Barrass, WA boy, former top, 6 pick, but he's off contract, so it's kind of like you can add him in, but at the same time, if he's happy to go to West Coast, they might not have to, trade for him at all. He's not a free agent, but if you go through the preseason draft, which I don't think clubs would want to, but nice little addition. 11.28 and Granger Barrass isn't a bad trade package, but I'd like to think the Eagles would want a bit more, or at least their fans would like a bit more. I think he's 27 Barrass, a good amount of good football left in him, and like I said, if they lose him, they've really only got Edwards and McGovern. So Granger Barrass does fill somewhat of a role, but what he's shown at AFL level, not sure. It's not a bad trade package though, but I think the Eagles would want more, and especially if they might not have any interest in Granger Barrass going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that is the Eagles update. So Soraya 6709 has thrown together a few Richmond questions. They're going to be a really interesting watch over the off-season, obviously, because where they're at. And then, obviously, there's just going to be, it seems like there's going to be a few players leaving. We already know that Dusty is retiring. So Soraya asks, do you think Baker will leave? How about Daniel Rioli? And will Dusty end up playing for the Gold Coast? So let's start with Baker. What are your thoughts? Is he poised to leave?
Yeah, it makes a bit of sense. Richmond would love to keep him. He'd probably be a captain if he stayed, but they can probably get a decent return for Liam Baker. That's a first round pick they can add to their hand as they're moving into a rebuild. For him, he's had 2 flags, made himself into a very valuable player, and now can return home to Freo or West Coast on probably what would be a pretty decent deal for him, and join a club that's probably in a similar position to Richmond that I think he grew up supporting. I think he was a West Coast fan, or Fremantle, who are right in the mix to contend this year. It'll be quite interesting to see where that decision lies. His best mate Jack Graham is, by a few accounts, a great chance to join West Coast, so that could persuade that decision. Obviously, from the monetary side of things, you'd like to think West Coast have a bit more wiggle room. From Liam Baker's standpoint, I think it's kind of a nice time to move on. Richmond will get something out of it as well, and if it's Freo, it's a big plus for their premiership hopes over the next few years. And for West Coast, he would be a very nice addition to have off half back, off half forward in the midfield, much like Harley Reid. Can just give a lot across a lot of positions. So yeah, he'd be a nice addition to a club that's working through a rebuild for sure.
How old is Baker at the moment?
I think he's a year shy of free agency, so he'd be 25, 26.
So you'd be getting him at sort of the peak of his powers too, so he'd
Yeah.
be worth a bit.
Yep.
Daniel Rioli.
Yes, this is the one, and Shea Bolton's been linked as well, but obviously not asked it. Both of them, I think they would really love to keep, and they can. Like, they are contracted. It's just going to be another one of those big tests of, player power and how much will a contract mean if a player really wants to leave and land somewhere else. The thing that Richmond will have to consider is, what are they going to get a return on for Dan Rioli if they wait a year or wait 2 years and he's off contract and a free agent. So Gold Coast, if that's exactly where he wants to go, like if that's the only club he wants to go to reunite with Damien Hardwick, then the Tigers have to look at, they've got 3 first-round picks. And if they can get 2 of those in return, that's a big plus. 2 first-round picks in a draft like this year's is going to be worth a lot more, you'd like to think, than any year coming. You can't really get a great grasp on future draft classes until kind of June of that year. And then at the same time, I think they would prefer to keep Rioli if they can get that return for him in a time of rebuilding. That's all the stuff they're going to have to weigh up. But yeah, if it's multiple first-round picks for Dan Rioli, it's hard to say no to. But I think overall, they would prefer to keep him. And
Do you think
just
he's
look
worth
at
2 first-round picks?
Oh yeah, just look at Sunday's game. Like, I don't think there are many back flankers who are worth 2 first-round picks. But geez, you watch him on Sunday against the Saints, and he was so dominant. And could have so much of an impact on the game. And the same thing is that, one of those first-round picks probably pushes out to mid-20s maybe. So they're not getting 2 top 10 picks. It's, as we said earlier in the show, it's pretty broad. But if they can try and, if it's the 2 later picks that the Suns have, which are, one's an end of first-round pick anyway, so you're looking at maybe mid-20s, and the other one is the Western Bulldogs pick, which, could be, still up for finding out for, given that they're right in the mix, and the Suns' pick maybe a top 10 pick. So yeah, they can get 2 decent picks in return for Dan Rioli. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see if they just keep him to his contract for the next couple of seasons.
I think it's questionable whether he's worth 2 first-round picks, but as you said, I didn't watch the last week's game. I haven't watched a lot of Richmond games.
The other thing is that the Suns might try and get some late picks from the Tigers. They just need some points to get Leo Lombard on their list. So it kind of works out for all parties, really.
Right. And the last one for the Richmond questions is,
Dusty.
Will Dusty end up at the Gold Coast?
I wouldn't have thought so. Like, you can't rule it out, and obviously he retired, so it would mean that if he went there this off season, that Richmond would still get compensation for him. It would kind of still work via free agency, I guess. It's kind of a weird one. One thing they wouldn't want is for him to try and get there, early next year after the draft period. Obviously they can, and the AFL can decline that. Like, you have to wait, I think, 18 months once you've retired to return to the game. But much like Liam Jones when he wanted to come back in after leaving Carlton, the AFL can be open to it, and Carlton were open to it if it meant that they got compensation, which they did, and I think they got Blake Acres out of that. So in a way that worked out well for the Blues, but you would like to think Richmond probably wouldn't be too happy, or they would stand in the way if it meant that they weren't getting anything for this year's draft at least.
I would just love to see it though. I'd like to see Dusty do exactly what Dimmer sort of did, is I'm quitting, and then take the job on the Gold Coast.
Well, if that's the case, that might be something that Richmond are already aware of.
Yeah.
Like, you'd like to think that maybe we can just announce a retirement, have a nice moment to end the year, and then not act as shocked when,
it's like when Hodgie retired and then went to go play
at the Lions. Yeah, a bit similar.
Did they get compensation?
I can't actually remember what happened.
Because that was pretty the next year after.
Yeah, see, I can't remember. But the thing is, like, Martin was off contract, so it's like, it's not like he ripped up the end of his contract. So there could be something sneaky where the Tigers actually delist Martin and don't have him lodged as a retirement, and then that would allow him to walk to the Suns with no, at any point, and they probably wouldn't get compensation if he's not going through free agency. So there's a few grey areas and avenues, but well, he's retired.
Yeah.
I think it'd be pretty cool if he just ended up as a one club player.
Yeah, I think the most likely scenario is Dusty just rides off into the sunset and we don't really hear from him for a long time. Kind of like Plugger, just out of
Gone.
it. Yeah. Anyway. All right, next question comes from Whisper Ethan Balls. Jack Lukosius coming to the Crows.
Yeah, this one's kind of sounds like it's picked up a bit of momentum, especially over the last week, like when he got axed and his form wasn't up to scratch, it's fair to say. So that really makes his value quite interesting, and you know what a club like Adelaide would have to give up to get him. You know, he's a former pick 2 selection, kicked 39 goals last year. Like, he can play at the level, obviously, but yeah, kind of just losing his spot. You know, Jed Walters obviously a big part of their future at the Suns. Mac Andrew forward has looked very, very nice, obviously, over the last fortnight, and then they've got Ben King there as well. So if he's surplus to requirements, then it sounds like the Suns would be pretty open. The other thing is, I think he'd be on a pretty sizable deal. Like, he's one of those players that they tried really hard to keep and were successful in doing so. But to do that, they always have to pay overs for those kind of players, given that they're not often bringing or have ever brought anyone in that's going to be on a massive deals. That's going to be on a massive deal that they have to pay up for. So if they could shed his salary cap, that might go a long way, especially if they want to get in someone like Dan Rioli. And the Crows, it makes sense. I think Port Adelaide would be a more suitable landing spot, but if the Suns are asking for like a first round pick, Port don't have that. Could give up future selections. Adelaide aren't giving up their first round pick, obviously, just given how low it is. So, you know, I can't recall if they have their second rounder, but that might make sense. Yeah, like I said, it's kind of hard to gauge how high the Suns might value Jack Lukosius. And a bit like Jack Bose's departure the other year, not saying that they'll partner a first round pick with him, but maybe it's just worth getting his salary cap off their books, and they'll be open to cutting back on some of that trade value that he might carry with him. So, yeah, interesting one.
Yep, interesting one. All right, so next question comes from Senk_M2007, and this is probably one that if this guy didn't ask for it, I probably would have asked for it as well. So, what is everything you have on the Ds? Also, Jack Viney to North. So obviously, the first thing we should probably address is Christian Petracca.
Yeah.
That story that broke, I think it was last night as of recording, that he is unhappy with the direction that the Ds are going, as are we all.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
Who wouldn't at Melbourne be unhappy with where things are going? Like, their list is right there, like, for a premiership. Now, they've got one, and some people think it'd be silly if they didn't have two with the players they've got. Hasn't been the easiest 12 months for the club. The Clayton Oliver stuff has been quite hard, but I feel like people are quite harsh on Clary this year. Like, a lot of people weren't expecting him to play a game, and he's played every single one. Like, I think that's something that fans have to remember.
It's weird to think that he didn't actually miss a game.
Yeah,
because
that's
of all
the
that.
thing. Like,
although he probably should have at the start. Like, he clearly didn't have a preseason.
Exactly. Like, I remember speaking in office, and we were just like, "What's a good year for like Clary to have?" And it's like, oh, maybe he plays 6 games, and is available for finals, and looks good by that point. And look, they might not be playing finals, but they got a whole year out of him. And you know, if they didn't have him, imagine where their season would be at. So, obviously difficult with where things are at for them, and obviously would lead to a lot of senior players being quite disgruntled, I think's the word, and disillusioned was another one that was used. And yeah, Petracca, absolutely. Like, he's set such high standards for himself and for the club that it'd be shocked if he wasn't upset. Yeah. Doesn't sound like it was to like the way Melbourne have kind of communicated since the report came out. It doesn't sound like he's ever a chance of leaving. He's got 5 more years on a 7-year deal, and they were holding pretty important conversations with him and with Gawn and with Goodwin, and they're just discussions you have to have with your senior players. So if it was ever to seek a trade, I think that would be the final straw for a lot of Melbourne fans. Just 3 years after that flag and where he won the Norm Smith, but God, it'd be interesting to see like what a club would have to give up. Like, you're talking more than pick 1 probably at that point, like for Christian Petracca. So it'd be very interesting. But thankfully, I think Melbourne fans can breathe a sigh of relief that they've quickly put a line through any chances of his exit. Jack Viney's an interesting one. We mentioned earlier, North Melbourne might just want some experience. He'd be quite a nice addition, but does he stunt the growth of their midfield a little bit? How reliant will they be on him in the middle? And, if they still want to prioritise Sheasel, Wardlaw, Luke Davies-Uniacke, McKercher, Powell, where does Viney sit in that pecking order, and how can they use him outside of midfield? So it's a bit of a tricky one. He's got contracted for at least another year, some time left. So and
he's 30 as well.
Yeah, he wouldn't come cheap still. Melbourne would like something decent in return, and what the Roos would be giving up would be quite interesting. But yeah, and I don't see that happening, but I don't mind the pursuit. It's just a kind of a weird one to marry up Viney.
Yeah.
And their midfield group.
It's just a weird one to consider.
It's he'd probably comes in ahead of Wardlaw, but do they really want to be pushing George Wardlaw out of that midfield group?
Yeah.
It'd be great to have 4 good midfielders, but they've got reserve for someone like Colby McKercher to eventually come through. How they attack the draft this year will be interesting, given quite midfield heavy at the top, but they might go for a Luke Trainer. So Viney, not too sure, but it was interesting, and I don't mind them at least asking the question. As for the rest of the Ds, you'd like to think maybe a key forward.
You'd like to think.
Yeah, they've got Van Rooyen and another first-round pick in Matt Jefferson on the books. Harrison Petty is a work in progress. Dan Turner's been a lot better than what I thought he would be as a forward.
Yeah, he's come along. I think Van Rooyen and Turner have come along a lot this year.
Yeah.
Turner has probably overtaken Petty.
Yeah.
But Goody is... he just doesn't see Petty as a backman anymore.
No.
He just seems really focused on developing Petty as a forward, much to the dismay of a lot of D's fans. But I think
it's more just
if he's not the main forward, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I think it's more just he's just... Goodwin's really just wanted to have trying to find a consistent forward group. Yeah. And if it's not performing well, I think he's okay with that to an extent. Okay with that, just get some cohesion and consistency, and hopefully things turn around, and he knows how reliable his backline can be. Yeah. So, I think in an ideal world, he'd like to have another key forward in there and Harrison Petty down back. And then you've got Dan Turner and Van Rooyen and eventually Jefferson in support. So Jack Waterman was someone I think who was linked to the Ds, but like I said, I don't think he leaves West Coast this year. Perfect type of target. It's just it's very hard to just go out and get a really good key forward.
Absolutely.
Do they look at kind of guys who aren't getting games elsewhere? Like Lockie Gallant might find it really hard to get a game at Adelaide at the moment. He kicked 8 goals in the sample on the weekend. Wouldn't come at much cost, but much like a Turner or a Petty, it might be worth, the shout and just have a look at a kid like him. So, he's another one that maybe they look at. And then probably a ruck might be good for them. Just someone to not maybe support Gawn. Like a ruck forward's kind of perfect. I think we had Peter Laddams in our trade targets for Melbourne. Someone who can just give a chop out, take on, a whole game if Gawn needs some rest, and at least sit forward and kick goals. So Laddams is kind of a good mould for that, and one that they might consider.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's stop talking about the Ds because I'm getting upset. So the next question is from DG's. What's the update on Zac Fisher? So we've talked a little bit about North.
I guess it's less trade related, but one that's certainly annoyed my Supercoach team is he hasn't played the last few weeks due to a plantar fascia issue, and that pretty much ruined the end of my Supercoach season. It's kind of an interesting one. Obviously, there was he really flourished when McKercher was unavailable and Sheasel had pushed up to the front half of the ground, and then McKercher had come back. I think there was a small period where there might have been some crossover there, and then he had a foot concern, and it's been very hard for him to get back into this side, whether that's through fitness or through form. He had a couple of quiet games right before he had his sit-in on the sideline. So at this point, he very well could be outside of North Melbourne's best side. They've played some good footy in the back half. McKercher looks awesome on that last line with his speed and ball use. So it's kind of made it very hard for Fisher, who was brought in as a slingshotting defender, to come into that side. Like I think they had Miller Bergman come in ahead of him after using Jaden Stevenson in a similar role, and he got injured. So Look, he might be fit this week. He's kind of been listed as a test the last fortnight. So if he's fit this week, which you'd like to think so, and he's not named, then yeah, there's kind of an interesting situation given he was brought in for them this year from Carlton.
Yep, absolutely. All right, so next one from Gunnet790_MB. I probably shouldn't be reading out these entire names, but is Caleb Daniel and Bailey Smith moving clubs at the end of the season? So
couldn't tell you.
A lot of talk about them too.
Yeah, Daniel's an interesting one, as is Jack McRae, just given their role and their, what they can be doing and what they are doing are two separate things. So Daniel's been sub and the last few weeks just hasn't been able to get a consistent run at it. And then Jack McRae's been using the VFL the last few weeks. I think he's averaging 40 plus touches this season at the state league level. More on Daniel though. Well, they're both contracted for a few years, but yeah, I don't know. Is there a club that wants him? Like, he's a great ball user and can find it, but at the same time, I think he's somewhat viewed as a liability in defence. Like with if you've as a matchup as an actual defender, like a good distributor out of the back line, but how much can you rely on him on his man? Can you play up on the wing? He's kind of been okay this year when he's done that, but yeah, I'm not sure if that's something that the clubs want out of him. He's good on ball, but again, can he be accountable for going up against a really, really good engine room, like he was coming up against a Carlton or a Melbourne or a GWS or a Brisbane or a Sydney? That'd be quite hard. And then half forward, very hard role. And just if a club needs a hard forward, but I think they're quite easy to find, and most clubs are pretty settled with those kind of stocks. So I don't know. I don't see him leaving, but there could, if a club wants him, I don't think it'd be that hard to get him.
Yeah, especially if he's not going to end up with as much game time, because given where they are to the Doggies, they're playing well, and then that comes into play with the next guy, Bailey Smith, as well. No one. I don't think anyone was really tipping them to be top 8 this year. They'd be competing for top 8, but they're about where they were predicted to be, bottom of the top 8.
Yep.
And that's without Bailey Smith, which no one was kind of expecting.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. A lot of people seem to think he's gone, and Geelong looks likely to be the landing spot for him. Makes sense. Cats want to add to a promising midfield group that just needs a couple of pieces, I think, still, and he'd be the star of the show there. Add in Max Holmes, Tanner Bruin, Jai Clark still kind of coming along a little bit. Not get another year out of danger, you'd like to think. So he'd be a nice addition for the Cats, and they probably have the right pick, or could have the right pick range. If they're around pick 12 mark, that might be enough for the Dogs. So a bit of an interesting one, but yeah, sounds like if it's not Geelong, it might be Hawthorn. But the Hawks have a lot tied up in. It's going for Tom Barrass and Josh Battle, so might make things a bit harder for them to go for Smith. So maybe it's all for the Cats, and he's heading down the highway.
Do you reckon Cotton On comes into play?
I don't know. It's kind of a weird one. I think having his, if you want to call it a side hustle, next door, helps. But I don't think there's a, closed doors kind of thing.
Who's the Hawthorn sponsor when it comes to clothing?
I have no. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But clubs are, a lot of players are just sponsored by Puma and Nike, and a lot of clubs have Puma and Nike. I don't know if stuff like that happens, but you have Dusty use Puma, and
surely
Richmond with Puma.
It's got to be part of the conversation.
Well, I think it helps.
Yeah,
it certainly helps. Him being a big ambassador and marketing tool for both of them.
Yeah.
And they're partners as well. It helps. is all I can say.
Yeah. I wonder what the socials team think as well, because he's going to be a good addition to any sort of TikTok account. So next question from our Facebook comes from Matt Beasley. Trade question. If you were Paddy Cripps, would you look to leave and go home?
No. He had the chance a few years ago, and I think what we saw last year and how close they got.
A few years ago, he was cooked apparently. He had a broken back, and he was done.
But he had the decision to make a few years ago to go to West Coast maybe, and stuck with the Blues. And I think, like I said, last year and how close they got to the grand final and potentially a flag, you could kind of see just how much it would mean to him to win a flag as Carlton's captain. I feel like that taste that he probably got last year would be like driving him even more. And as hard as this year's been, if they have to look to next year, they'll look to next year. But no, it'd be very hard. I think he's got 2 years left on a deal. So it might be interesting in that point, but I don't think he's ever going to be packing his bags as captain of Carlton.
Yeah.
And just leaving after, how close they came last year and how much he would really want to be the man to lead them to the next flag.
He doesn't seem like the type that would
No.
do that to the Carlton faithful, but I would love to see it just for the absolute melts that you'd see all over social media.
Yeah, it would be...
It'd be a lot of talk back.
It'd be so much. I feel like it's like maybe it's like Bont at the Dogs is probably the only other one like bigger than if he was to ever leave. Like, there would be riots and like Footscray would burn to the ground if the Bont ever left.
If Melbourne fans were any active at all, the Petracca story should have caused some.
I think
riots,
but it's kind of like that. Like I think everyone just knew it's just like he's not going to leave.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think Cripps is going to stay. The next 3 questions are sort of responses from our trade target series. So if you wanted to check that out, we did a trade target for we did 5 trade targets for every team. Some of them probably a little outdated. A few people have been signed since we have named some names. But
some people were signed the day after.
That is the trouble with doing YouTube content. So. All right, so this one's from the Hawthorn trade targets video. Ash Leckie. So I think you floated the idea of Jones going to Harrison Jones going to the Hawks, and a lot. Ash Leckie saying that Calsher Dear is already ahead of Jones.
Yeah,
which I agree with.
Well, ahead no, but like if you're probably picking who you'd want to have, Calsher Dear has been awesome.
Yeah,
like for a kid who I thought probably isn't going to get a game this year, just let him add some muscle and some size and develop. As much as they kind of need some key forward assets, the Hawks, like I didn't think he was one that was probably going to be thrown into the fire. Yeah. But he's been awesome. Like he came into our rookie rankings for a fair bit, and I think he was unlucky not to be named in them this week. Just he's high flying, good for a goal a game, and acting as that kind of third tall that Harrison Jones kind of is. He's been super for Hawthorn and a really great pickup for them as that father-son. That he might not have been drafted if it wasn't for his ties to Hawthorn. So it's been awesome for them this year. And absolutely. At this point, you're probably looking at Dear over Jones, who I think is re-signed, or there was talk that he's hit an extension anyway at the Bombers. So Hawks fans can be absolutely wrapped with what they've seen from Calsher Dear this year, what I was taking into the year for him, very low expectations, and not really seeing him at AFL level. Now he's had, I don't know, 12 plus games maybe, and like I said, maybe as many goals across that period. And just look at Sunday's win over Carlton, arguably his best yet. So really promising for them, just to have that kid come along so quickly already. Yeah.
It's going to be interesting in a few years' time to compare them, maybe, because at the moment Hawthorn, they're playing so well, but they could be like a bit of a St Kilda where stakes were so low coming into the season, expectations were low, and they've just gotten it together. But this is Hawthorn we're talking about too, so they could just be good for the next 3 years again. So interesting one. The next comment comes from the Hawthorn trade targets video from Adam Corin. Bit of a longer comment, but basically it comes down to, would Max or Ben King be better players at a better club in Hawthorn?
Yeah, it'd be pretty nice to have, Gold Coast are good enough. Yeah. Just they just falter in some silly areas. But I'm assuming this comment was coming around the time that Max King was probably being raised as a, is it time that he moves on? He'll be a Saints player through and through, I'd like to think.
I think they're both pretty happy where they are.
Yeah, and Ben King's turned down, I think, the chance to return to Victoria 3 times already, and probably every year club's asking the question. And it'd be interesting this time next year just to see where things sit with the Suns, and if they're just getting that breakthrough. And he's done plenty for them, and hopefully they can return the favour. As mentioned just before, though, Hawthorn would love one of them. And look, they probably asked the question just seeing how aggressive that they've been this year. But yeah, they'll try and tap into that key forward market in 12 months' time again, and it could be one of them. But I'd like to think they stay at their respective clubs, and there might be another name out there for the Hawks instead. Yeah. But yeah, they would certainly thrive in that kind of side with the names around them and the kind of players they've got kicking to them.
Yeah.
From the midfield. So yeah, an untap maybe a bit more, but I still think that they've got a lot to offer at St Kilda and
just
Gold Coast.
Ball coming in at them with speed. Last one from the Saints trade target videos. So this comes from TNT 12. Wouldn't bringing free agents through the door at St Kilda heavily impact the club's compensation for Josh Battle were he to leave?
Yeah.
So a few parts of this, but
yeah. So it's the Saints are in an interesting position because as much as they'd like to maybe bring in some good talent, like they won't be doing it through a free agency, as they've kind of mentioned, because if they sign a free agent and then lose Josh Battle through the same window, what could be pick 5's compensation if they lose him, might get diluted back to end of first round pick or a pick 15 or something, and they don't really want to be losing such a good selection, so it kind of rules them out of going for free agents this year, assuming they lose Josh Battle. And at the same time, if they want to get good talent the other direction, good experienced talent the other direction is trading, and they're not really going to be wanting to give up their their draft assets, or at least their high-end draft assets this year. So they'll probably want to go to the draft. If they've got 2 top 6 or 7 picks, and that'll be very helpful for them. The only other way they're going to have to get good talent in is by moving on equally good talent. So it's a tricky position for them, but maybe after the year that we've seen, going to the draft for another season might not be the worst thing for them, especially in a good draft year like this and having 2 top 10 picks. Just means that Saints fans can't really expect to be having an enjoyable trade period or free agency period, especially if Battle is to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, well, that wraps it up
Done.
for this week's mailbag. Thanks, Mitch. You faced the music pretty well. Thank you to everybody that sent in your questions. If you'd like to send some in, we'll probably do another episode next week if you're up for it.
Yeah.
How do you feel?
No, it's fine. Can you hear what people have to say?
Feel free to go harder on Mitch if you want.
Yes, that's fine.
Follow us on Instagram and on Facebook and on YouTube. Subscribe to the channel. That's the best way to send in your questions to the mailbag. Also, another plug for our AFL Team Builders series, which is currently going. It's been going for the past 10 years, if I can remember. That's why I haven't been on the channel. I've just been devoting my entire life to that series, where we run through how all the non-Victorian AFL teams got built, starting all the way from Sydney, South Melbourne, all the way through to GWS. Sort of kicked off because of obviously the Tassie team coming in a couple of years. So that's a really, really great series.
Absolutely awesome.
Neil at Seawang has done an amazing job with it. And so last episode, I think by the time this goes up, the next one will be the GWS Giants on Tuesday. So keep an eye out on that. Subscribe to the channel. Thank you, Mitch.
Thanks, Phoenix.
And we'll catch you on the next one.